Episode 3 of the 1619 Project is entitled Music. Black music has historically been an outlet for Black people. During slavery, slaves sang while they labored. Singing and making music was a way for them to unite in their shared experience. Music evoked so much of what they were feeling. Slaves would take European hymns and make them their own. Black expression in music would become fodder for racist whites to exploit and mock. Jim Crow was introduced in the 1800s as a blackface character. It was a means of mocking Black people celebrating in song and dance. Around the 1830s, what became known as blackface, or white men painting their faces with paint and exaggerated lips and eyes to mock the appearance of Black people, would become a huge hit with white audiences. So not only were they once again finding a way to degrade Black people, but they were making money off of it. Black people who wanted an opportunity to make money performing for a white audience would have to perform in blackface. But African American talent and creativity would not be denied or limited. Fisk University Jubilee Singers began as a 9-member choral ensemble around 1870 to earn money for the university. Many of the original members were former slaves. Initially, white audiences were skeptical and at times hostile toward their performance because they didn't sing in the traditional minstrel fashion. But eventually, white audiences would grow to appreciate their sound. The ensemble would tour towns in the United States and even abroad. This episode also talks about the musical lexicon. We learn how each genre predates the other, illustrates the plight of the Black community, and is more experimental than the previous genre. What's discussed is the evolution of Black music, from Negro spirituals, gospel music, blues, jazz, disco, funk, hip-hop, and R&B. One thing that's mentioned frequently is the challenges that the artists faced, the balance of being true to their artistry and being true to their community. Some artists had the challenge of disarming white audiences to be more acceptable. There was a fine line between being acceptable to white audiences and being called a sellout to Black audiences. We learn about Berry Gordy, how he founded Motown Record Company in 1959. A big part of its success was the availability of cameras. People could not only hear, but see singers perform their favorite songs. These visuals would also combat prior racial stereotypes that degraded Black entertainers. Although African American artists suffered indignities of racial segregation in their daily lives, they came alive on the screen. Their humanity was on full display on screen. We learned that Black people desired to take control of their own image and brand. For so long, African Americans had been dehumanized and degraded by whites for entertainment. Now they were starting to tell their own stories and establish their own brand, which would serve as a stark contrast to whites' perception. By the late 1970s, more artists would rebel and make more liberal music, which was more aligned with the pulse of the people. Artists like Marvin Gaye would spearhead this shift by making music where he discussed racism, poverty, and war. Artists that existed outside the mainstream would follow suit and popularize a new sound called funk. George Clinton, James Brown, and Betty Davis would introduce a more freeform, rebellious sound. It was an appropriate shift in that many African Americans had grown weary of the docile Negro persona. They wanted revolution and change that the previous civil rights era had failed to deliver on. We hear from Nile Rodgers, who talks about his experience in the industry. He talks about the backlash that came after the mass success of disco music. When asked about why he thought this occurred, he cited racism, classism, and the threat of losing an exalted position as contributing factors. The episode closes with discussing how hip-hop is a culmination of so many genres before it, how elements of the genre are birthed from the same experimental spirit of funk and disco. The episode ends with a quote from two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning critic Wesley Moore. He states, "The sound of Black music is the sound of freedom. Black music is uncatchable." Thank you for joining me for the episode 3 review. I hope you take the time to support this docuseries on Hulu. It's well worth your time.